Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest instalment of the LGFP webinar series. Today, we are grateful to have with us the Department of Local Government, who will be doing an update on the introduction of local government sustainability framework. With me today is Steve Robbins and Deanne Stewart. So really happy to have them with us. And without further ado, I'll introduce Steve. But just before I do, just for everyone, just running through the process of this webinar, it'll be about 30 to 45 minutes. You'll notice on your screen there's a Q&A button, so feel free to ask questions. What we'll probably do is take those questions on notice and answer those at the end of the session. But as things come up through the session, you feel like asking a question, you click on the Q&A button and type in your question, and we'll endeavour to answer that as we get through today's presentation. But I'd like to welcome first Steve Robbins. Thanks, Steve, for presenting today. And look, probably without further ado, I'll hand over to you and look forward to listening what you have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning, everyone. As Michael said, Steve Robbins from the Department of State Development. I'm the Executive Director of the Finance, Performance and Programs unit within Local Government Division, and I'm sure have come across many of you who are on the webinar today at various LGFP and other council events around the place. We really value the chance to be involved and engaged in LGFP organised events, and today's no different. So thank you off the top to Michael and all the team at the LGFP for once again making available some time for the department to connect with you. As Michael said, I showed a couple of officers with me from the department today. Deanne Stewart is the director of our financial performance team, and Amy McGriffin, who's team as well. So we're available this morning. The plan is that we'll spend some time up front with a short update on a range of things in relation to the sustainability framework, and then we'll roll into some Q&A, which I think is increasingly the more important component of this, with a lot of what's needed on the framework side already set. It's about sort of the discussion and collaboration moving forward. Also, just as we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. For me, that's the Turrbal and Yagara people here in southeast Queensland, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land on wherever you may be. And I'm sure we've got people all over Queensland today joining us on the webinar. So thank you for that. If we can just sort of jump into the slide deck now, and I promise not to sort of labour too much on PowerPoint this morning, but I think it's worth just sort of catching up on a few things. Like I said in my sort of intro, we've been talking about the sustainability framework for a while now, which is necessarily the case because these sort of things take time to establish and bed down and communicate with stakeholders on. And I guess I acknowledge that for some people, and in fact, hopefully many people on the session today, some or a fair bit of what I talk about over the next few slides is perhaps not truly new content. I'm going to touch on some of the key points about the framework itself, and provide an update on the financial management guideline, which will be being formally made shortly. But I think even if that's if it's not all new, that's okay, because there's a couple of challenges that I think the department and councils generally are dealing with in relation to the framework, and one is the need to ensure we've got open communication and ongoing dialogue between people like myself and Deanne and the division and councils, because the sustainability framework will be an evolving thing. We're not going to have it all right up front. It's evolutionary change in the way we think about the sustainability challenge of council. So opportunities to connect and catch up are really important, and I guess hence my comments about the importance of Q&A time and the chance to discuss things that are on people's minds. The other part is using events like today as a reminder about, I guess, the important role you all have to play in supporting good communication back into councils and the business units and teams and organisations that you represent. I'm out talking a fair bit to people in local government. Sometimes that's about the sustainability framework. Oftentimes it's not. But when I do, I get a sense that there's still a bit of a mix, which is very understandable about where people are at in terms of understanding the sustainability framework. Some areas, and thanks to groups like the LGFP, some parts of council really sort of quite a long way along, understanding what the plan is, where this is headed. Other parts aware of the concept, but certainly keen to learn more. So I guess my challenge to you all off the back of events like today is, are there things that can be taken away that should be shared with the asset management team or the corporate governance team or wherever else there might be in your organisation about the framework and its impacts and opportunities for your council. So basically, that's the plan for today. A bit of an overview on a few key things, a little bit of a chat about next steps, and then into some Q&A. I won't labour the overview slide. I think most people on the session today are probably well across that. The department obviously is responsible for overseeing and monitoring the sustainability and performance of councils and supporting councils to ensure they're strong and sustainable and supporting strong and sustainable communities into the future. We've been on this journey for a while in looking at a new way to think about that and acknowledging that while finances are an important part of sustainability, sustainability is more than just that. And that's the approach we're taking through this whole project, is the concept of building a more holistic approach to thinking about sustainability, both financial and non-financial elements of that. It was actually at the LGFP conference last year that in the day or two before that, the overarching the overarching sustainability framework document was released to the sector. It's available on our website, and I'm sure you've all had the chance to have a look at that at some stage or another. That's forming the basis of how we think about how the department will think about council performance and sustainability into the future, and will form, I guess, the guardrails, if you like, for how the department thinks about targeted and tailored support for the sector. When considering the support we provide moving forward, it's not just about the financial. It's about a whole range of things. And while finances will continue to be still at the core of our consideration of council sustainability, and I'll touch on that through the guideline in a few slides' time, I think it's important to recognise that when the department talks about monitoring sustainability and thinking about responses into the future, it's really thinking about that broader perspective. And sometimes that will be, I guess, the traditional way of what does pure financial sustainability look like, and what do the necessary interventions or supports need to look like there in particular circumstances. But it's also recognising that there's opportunities in other places to support council sustainability, and that may not be supporting a council with necessarily struggling or weaker financial performance, but indeed supporting all councils, regardless of financial performance, to enhance and optimise their long-term sustainability. Like I said in my intro, the framework will evolve over time. It needs to. This is the first time I think we've had a meaningful go at thinking about a holistic concept of sustainability. It won't all be right. It would be a worry if there was nobody either in the department, in councils, in broader stakeholders who was saying, "Hey, should we think about this? Could we do this differently?" And I guess that's something that I think we really need to all be committed to over the coming months and years, is how is this new concept working as the plan hits reality, and how do we monitor and enhance the framework itself over time. Look, just really quickly, this is a slide I've used a fair bit over the last 12, 18 months as well. I think it just acknowledges that how we've got to here is very much linked back to the department's vision for local government, and that is that councils are business ready, and that is to do the business of local government and deliver livable communities. And to do that, councils need to have the right foundations and be doing the basics well. They need to have the right infrastructure, and that's sort of critical to having a strong financial position as well, in that you're delivering infrastructure that the community needs, wants, and most importantly can afford. and that the councils have the right outlook. They're investing in ideas that are right for the community. And the whole concept of what does a broader and holistic sustainability framework look like really does come back to these core principles that sort of first crystallised what the concept of a more holistic framework could look like, and led to the development of, in consultation with the sector, the development of the 5 sustainability elements that are on that slide. We consulted on these fairly extensively through a discussion paper process. What we heard back, and I've spoken to you about this before, was that they're broadly right. I think we all probably agree that down the track there might even be room for some further elements, whether that's sort of in more of a environmental that side of sustainability, if you like, side of things. But for now, there's general agreement that the 5 elements are a good representation of what goes into thinking about a holistic view of council sustainability. The other kind of intro slide here, which I think this slide and the previous 2 sort of come as a bit of a set when thinking about how does the department want to use the sustainability framework into the future. It's really about helping inform us in many respects how the sector is travelling and what our opportunities are for applying one or a combination of many of the levers that we have to support good outcomes for local government. So when we think about whether you're in a council or on the department side of things, when you think about what does outcome of the sustainability framework look like, I think it's important to remember that it's not necessarily hard-nosed interventions or the sort of strong end of that. It could be a whole range of things. It could be the way we do training. It could be the sort of policy environment that's needed and legislation change. It could be the way we fund councils into the future. Better information and a more holistic understanding of council sustainability and performance will give us a better basis to think more holistically about what sort of performance responses are needed. Just moving into, I guess, where things are at and some of the key documentation. As I said earlier, in November we published the overarching non-statutory guidance document that will support councils with thinking about sustainability holistically. Over time, we'll look to embed the principles and language that underpin the framework and that are represented through the non-statutory guidance document into our engagement with the sector across, I guess in theory, across all facets of the way we work with councils. It'll provide a common language for monitoring, measuring and responding to council sustainability challenges. The framework itself, the non-statutory document, if you haven't had a chance to have a read of it yet, I'd really recommend you do. Sets out the broader concept of sustainability that goes beyond just the financial. And I guess in that context, there's a million ways we could go about measuring or thinking about the concept of sustainability, particularly in the rapidly changing and evolving environment that local governments have to operate in. I mean, think about everything from COVID to inflation to supply chain to natural disaster. It's kind of all been happening over the last few years, and in many respects, will continue to. So acknowledging that and that challenge, we think it is important though to have a go at establishing a consistent set of indicators that over time help us to better understand and respond to the challenges the sector is facing. It's necessary in that to think about, and this is sort of the new step in many respects, to think about both the quantitative and the qualitative measures, particularly when we've got areas like governance and compliance as elements of the framework. How are we thinking about that in the context of a consistent approach to considering sustainability versus narrower and more traditional lenses around finance and assets? Just sort of touch a little bit today, which is probably somewhere where we haven't gone as much in the past on that point around the qualitative and quantitative indicators. In establishing a broader concept of financial, it's necessary to think a little bit more, I guess, abstractly about some of the elements of the framework and how they'll be measured. The quantitative measures that cover things like governance, compliance, and operating environment, for the most part, are more subjective and therefore a little bit harder to measure. But while they're perhaps harder to measure, they're important because they'll help contextualize and inform a better understanding of some of the harder and quantitative elements of council sustainability. The next couple of slides, I'll touch on this part of the framework in a little bit more detail. And I should just say, and it's on that slide there, and I'll talk about it in a minute, the quantitative elements are the ones that are going to be set through the financial management guideline, and you've all seen a draft of that document, and they'll be the ones that are reflected in annual financial statements. But some of what we're hearing through our engagement with councils is that side pretty well understood at the moment. Still, some grey and a little bit of further clarity required around the non-financial indicators. I think it's fair to say that and I think former Deputy Director General of this division said at one stage, and maybe it was even at the LGFP conference I think a couple of years ago, that in some respects the qualitative side of the framework is the Local Government Act, and that's very much true. And while the department won't be publicly assessing and rating councils against non-financial measures of the framework, and there's no true exhaustive list, we do think it's important that we have a clear view on, and that there's understanding within the sector around the types of qualitative indicators that the department will be thinking about when it comes to how we observe and the sort of information we gather, and how we might then contextualise the financial and asset performance of councils. It'll very much inform the way our regional advisors, for example, engage with councils in terms of thinking about those elements. I might just flick to the next slide. There's kind of 6 key areas that we've identified, and this is reflected in the non-statutory guideline. And I won't read through every example on this list, but there's 6 key areas we've identified in terms of qualitative indicators. As I said before, it's not proposed, and we have no plan to be ranking councils in a sort of public way, and rating councils in relation to these sort of measures and example indicators. And by no means is this an exhaustive list. If there's a particular challenge or set of circumstances in a local government, but these are the things that we think are probably particularly important when it comes to thinking about some of the challenges and contextualising some of the challenges, or the overall position a council has when it comes to their financial performance. We'll be releasing, there's a line at the bottom of that slide that talks about FAQs. We'll be releasing a new set of FAQs very shortly, and hopefully in the next few days, that includes some further information about these indicators. One of the sort of observations that's come through, even things like our tropical training, is, well, how will the department be scoring my council in relation to a particular non-financial measure? I guess I'd put every one of these today, perhaps if it's at ease you need to be around that. There is no plan to be publicly ranking councils or rating councils in relation to those non-financial elements. It'll be purely contextual for us. We might want to talk with councils at times about that, but it'll help inform those broader policy responses. Look, just to move through, and I'll try and not talk for too much longer in relation to the slides themselves. The financial management guideline is the statutory part of this, and is where we move back into the more traditional ratios and measures side of things. We published a version of the statutory guideline, a draft of the statutory guideline in November last year, at the same time as the non-statutory guide was released, and we're in the process of formally making that at the moment. What it means in terms of the plan for that is that for councils, the statutory guideline will commence on the 1st of July. It'll be for the 23-24 year. That'll have the new ratios in them. Won't need to be included in the 23-24 budget process, but will be included in the 23-24 financial statements. We're currently working through some feedback on the guideline that we got when we released the draft last year, and I'll talk to you about that in a couple of moments. Just to reflect quickly on the measures in the guideline that they're listed on this slide. They'll need to be calculated and published as part of the annual statutory financial reporting process. The measures highlight the core financial sustainability areas, and they cover three main themes of operating performance, liquidity, and asset management. The additional areas we're also interested in is the financial capacity of councils and the ratios associated with the category are for contextual purposes only. So I guess that means that depending on your council and what category you end up in, your council's individual circumstances mean that you'll have to report on between 8 and 9 ratios each year. The QAO, as you look at that screen there, the QAO will audit measures 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. Obviously 9 for those councils with QTC debt. I think just to sort of wrap up on the ratios and measures themselves, I'll just look really quickly to the sustainability targets slide. This has been something that we've had a good chance to talk with the sector about as part of finalising the statutory guideline. There's no proposals to amend the targets as you see them on that slide, and I guess they represent a sliding scale based on the tier councils are in around some of the measures. A few of them, like operating cash ratio, it doesn't matter what size council you are, the target is the same. We have made a few amendments, so we are making a few final amendments to the guideline, which are based sort of exclusively on the feedback from councils on the draft we released in November. Most of the amendments, I guess I would call minor and administrative, include some changes to key definitions, such as that for fees and charges and total operating expenditure. And there's some information on this slide, and this information will be available through the LGFP after the session as well. The slides will be available. So we've made a few tweaks to those definitions. We'll also be clarifying in relation to tiers that a council will be in the tier that they're assigned to, which is already publicly available for 3 years, regardless of any population changes. One of the things we heard back from the sector was some concern about, well, if I'm just at the upper limit of my tier population-wise and I'm a growing council, you know, what certainty do I have about where I'll be and what I'll be measured against the next year and the next year? So we're going to take that 3-year approach initially, because we've committed to doing a full review of the guideline in 2026, 3 years after it's established. We've also made some changes just in relation to reporting. So ratios will now need to be reported on a single year basis, unrestricted cash expense cover ratio and the asset renewal funding ratio, again, based on some feedback from councils about that requirement. Lastly, on the guideline, we're doing some further work to develop a risk performance matrix, or risk performance framework, I should say, which will support interpretation of the measures and targets in the statutory guideline. We're developing that up at the moment, as has been the case throughout the whole process. Our commitment is to do that in collaboration with the QAO and Queensland Treasury Corporation, so that councils have confidence that what's being pushed out to the sector, we're all singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. I would expect that we'll be able to share that with the sector before too long. We're also going down that phase transition path towards reporting on the asset renewal ratio, which will be supported by the work we're doing in our advancing asset management initiative. And once the guideline is made and commences on 1 July 23, we will be planning to conduct that first review in 2026. Just to close out, and then I'm very happy to throw it open to questions and discussion. It's probably just worth checking in on the timeline. It's been quite a long journey, and indeed predates the timeline that exists here. We're getting to the really pointy end of it now in terms of key documentation commencing. We'll be publishing, to support that, we'll be publishing a range of material over the coming weeks and months, including additional FAQs, and we're also doing some work internally to look at the department being ready to operationalise the framework. But I guess my call to everyone on the line today is, if there's anything that you think would be beneficial in terms of your own understanding and use of the framework, or indeed how that helps inform the understanding and use of the framework by your council, elected or organisational, we're really keen to understand what that may be. We've started running some dedicated one-on-one with councils. We've got a couple of those coming up in the next few weeks. And if you think that would be of benefit to your organisation, either at an officer level or indeed with your elected councillors, we're really happy to be talking about how we can make that work. So I'd just say reach out. Anything around comms and engagement, we'd love to hear from you. To do that, and the final slide I've got is, don't forget, LG Sustainability is our email address. Dion Stewart, who's with me today, is director of our financial performance team and looks after this project for us. Is the other kind of key place to go in terms of needing to make contact with the department on this. With that, I might leave the formal part of the presentation there, and Michael, I'll hand it back to you for any questions, comments, and discussion.
Thanks, Steve. Probably just a first question or comment for yourself and Deanne is just what your thoughts are around, you mentioned at the start around the role of finance professionals as part of this new framework rollout. And I think it's important that finance professionals do play a role, not just the department, in terms of maybe education, particularly within their own councils. Do you think that that's something probably that we should be thinking proactively about in terms of that, councils going through budget workshops now, finance professionals should have a good understanding of the new framework, the guideline, the changes in the ratios, and maybe starting to weave some of that commentary into those workshops, and even, separate sessions with, particularly, I think, executive management, and as you mentioned, asset management professionals, but also councillors as well. Do you think that's something that, we should be on the front foot with?
Yes, I do. And I think that we should be, to my comment about supporting councils with communication and engagement material, we should be helping with that in ways that aren't going to get us tripped up in your business necessarily, but are going to help make that job easier. I think not even thinking of a particular council or councils here, but I've sort of heard of a few different experiences where, some councils, that kind of organisational wide, top to bottom discussion seems to be working quite well. Other councils where it either isn't or hasn't had the chance to start yet. I guess I'd just say any opportunity to engage and integrate some of the thinking around this into budget workshops and forward planning and conversations between finance units and assets and project teams or governance teams would be great, and we're happy to help in useful ways around that.
And probably just further to that question was, and on a previous slide you had up, was regarding the timing of the introduction of reporting on the ratios, which was the general purpose financial statements for 23-24.
Yep.
I had a couple of queries from members around, can councils potentially be a bit more proactive and start introducing these ratios through their budget documents? I know it's not obviously a compulsory requirement, but just a query saying, is there anything stopping councils from being proactive in that respect?
Nothing at all. So the way the regulation will work when that's finalised is that it'll say that the transitional arrangement there will say that the current guideline, the 2013 one, still applies for the budget process this year. So councils would need to make sure those ratios were in. But there's nothing stopping a local government being more proactive. And in fact, I was only talking to the CFO of a council the other day who basically said, look, we already include a fair number of the new ones in our budget and our financial reports to councils. So we're actually just going to jump in and start that from this budget cycle.
And I think proactive is probably a good thing, isn't it? To if you can, you got the capability to do that, then it's the measures. I think there's definitely improvement in the measures, and introducing them, to council would be, I think, a proactive move and beneficial, I think, for that understanding. So.
And might make, and far be it from me to sort of suggest I know what will make life easier or not easier for council finance teams talking to their councillors, but might even in some respects make life a bit easier with some of those old challenges that councils face, things like depreciation. And I won't get too high up on the soapbox about depreciation here this morning, but if you've got a council that councillors are always bothering you about the impacts of depreciation, and that's a real challenge for you, I think I'd say two things. One, the department completely gets that, and we are responding to that through the way the new guideline works, and using ratios like the operating cash ratio that remove that impact. So it might even make those impacts and some of those conversations easier for you with councillors around some of those challenges. And if you want to let your councillors know if they're particularly worried about depreciation, and you're a small council, you let them know the department isn't particularly worried about depreciation ourselves, because we know that challenge is a real one, and that there's accounting circumstances there that make life hard, and hopefully that's one of the positives one of the many positives out of the framework is making some of those conversations with councillors easier.
For sure, and that's that the revenue capacity requirement there. It's challenging for some councils, but yeah, that makes sense. Got a question here, Steve and Deanne, just regarding the tiers. The question is around if there's a review in 3 years' time, is that something that the department might look at in terms of how the methodology behind the tiering of councils, or is that something you think's been, there was a fair bit of consultation already that's happened on that prior to the framework being adopted?
That's a good question, and I'll throw it to Diane in a moment. I guess I'd reflect on, the top line answer is I'd reflect on my comments from earlier, and that is that there's no guarantee, and in fact it's almost certain, that we haven't got all of the framework right. I mean, I think we feel like we've taken a robust approach that's involved a lot of engagement with the sector at both an individual council level and with key sector peak bodies. But I wouldn't want to rule in or out anything, and sort of I think to sort of sit here and say no, we would have no need to change the way we're tiering councils, and the methodology for building up those tiers in 3 years' time would be really preemptive and overconfident. Diane, I don't know, what do you think?
No, I think like a lot of work went into working out the best way to sort of group councils at this stage. So I think we've landed with a lot of consultation and took the feedback into consideration from many councils who are very passionate in this particular area. So I think we have landed on a fairly good and robust sort of methodology for that. But in saying that, in 3 years' time, the department will keep monitoring this, and if we do think that it might need to be tweaked, then we'll probably come back out to the sector to sort of test the water, I suppose. But yeah, so I think we're just sort of putting our toe on the water now and working through for the next 3 years, and trying to give a bit more guarantee and certainty for councils that you'll be in that particular group for 3 years, and just strap yourself in, I suppose, until the next review.
Well, and to build on that, I think we miss the opportunity in all this. If this is set, if the framework's set and the new guideline starts, and then we wait 3 years before we want to talk to anyone about it, that's certainly not how we'll want to be. And I'm almost certain councils will be feeling the same way. So I sort of see, that 3-year review cycle as probably being the natural point where we go, well, what have we heard and what have we worked through with the sector over 3 years that feeds into a review, rather than saying, right, let's start a review process now. So it'll be ongoing over that time.
Great, thank you. Another question we've got through, so it's probably in addition to the financial management sustainability aspect, is the department intending to revisit or reinvigorate the community budget consultation requirements? Or is there, I suppose that the question there is there something that might want to be is that something that's on the agenda moving forward in terms of community, budget consultation?
Yeah, look, it's another good question. I think, and without sounding like I'm taking it on notice, I think what I'd say is that there's been a few recommendations over time from the QAO that link back to council financial management that the department's still working its way through. We're conscious of, I guess, the pros and cons of community consultation on the budget and the concerns that come with that from a process perspective, despite the outcomes and the benefits around a more transparent conversation with communities that hopefully has communities understanding the challenges that councils face in terms of providing services and balancing a budget. I sort of feel like, and this might be a very first principles answer, but I sort of feel like through the framework and the establishment of a stronger base and a broader base for how we think about sustainability will provide us with a good platform to work collaboratively on a whole range of things, whether that's on how finances link into asset management and better long-term asset planning and asset management for councils, through to elements like community budgeting. So that's probably a waffly and somewhat Weasley way out of that one. But I think that link between services councils are providing and what the community is expecting, the assets councils own and are responsible for managing, maintaining and delivering, and the underlying premise of the sustainability of a council is really the space that we want to be operating in with councils over the coming years, and whether that looks like a community budgeting changes or whether it looks like something else, I think we'll want to talk collaboratively on. Would you add anything there, Dion? Is that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it's probably, again, it's about meaningful engagement, really, I think, with communities, isn't it? And it's what is being presented part of your budget process for the engagement piece with the community. Do we start thinking about opening up a can of worms around services and service levels and that type of information? But yeah, it's obviously I think something that's councils, it's part of the local government principles, effective engagement with communities. So I suppose it's something that councils need to be thinking about moving forward around the budget. So
yeah, absolutely.
Here's a good question, and I'm quite proud it's come from the LG finance professionals. Where the ratios are to be reported on a 5-year average, is it going to be on a weighted average or straight average? And that's a really good question. Probably haven't really thought about that one, but it's an interesting one, and maybe that's a take on notice question, but unless you've got that sorted out already.
Jan might want to provide some commentary on that one.
I think it's I will take that on notice, and we probably need to be a bit clearer in the guideline, but it probably at this stage might just be a straight average, but let me go back and make sure that is 100% correct, and we are clear in our guideline as well.
Thank you, Deanne. Just another question's come through. For councils with transient population movements, how would you best calculate the population growth ratio, noting it's contextual in nature, of course?
So with that ratio, the department will publish its the population figures. So we're going to be using the ABS as our data source. So councils won't have to go and do that themselves. So that will be the source for councils to use. So the idea will be that we will publish that on the website for councils, and they'll be able to use that. But definitely the source will always be the ABS for population. Yep.
Great. And there's a question just regarding the non-financial sustainability criteria, and you touched on that earlier on a slide, Stephen. Just regarding the timing of, is there still any timing sort of regarding the potential implementation of basically the non-financial measures, and are there any more examples that are going to be released regarding what they might look like?
Yeah, good question. And this is a bit, I think, for everyone, a little bit of the, it's new ground in terms of thinking about how we consider the holistic concept of sustainability that by its nature includes a range of non-financial things, but in a kind of consistent way. The information I shared earlier is where our thoughts are at around what we feel, what the department feels are important elements to be considering when contextualising the financial and assets components of sustainability. But I think it's important to remember that there is no limit in some respects to that. Like the nature of a council's operating environment, its governance, its compliance, just sort of sits on a continuum, and we're not. There won't be a point where the departments is, or at least I don't envisage in the short to medium term there'd be a point where we'd say we're only going to think about these 5 things or this contained list of things, and then you're going to get there'll be a score in an Auditor General report or something like that to Parliament that says, and here's how council A, B, or C went. The approach we'll be taking is to think about that information and to try and do that as consistently as possible. We want to be thinking about the same things across the sector in terms of how is that contextualising council financial performance. So are councils that are financially doing well, seeing the same experience in those other elements, or how are those other elements impacting on a council's performance, and how might that inform the responses we make, rather than sort of saying, and yes, here's the list, and this is only the list that we'll be thinking about, because sometimes, and as everyone on this call would know, sometimes the circumstances that lead to a sustainability challenge for a council are very specific and very unpredictable. What we're trying to do is think about what are the key things in the non-financial space that we want to focus on. Diana, I'll probably get some thoughts from you on this one as well. So I think it is sort of the cognitive leap in some respects around this whole project, taking it out of the number crunching and into the sort of the subjective.
So I'd probably just add to that. I suppose one of the way I think of it as well, the ratios themselves are hard and fast and easy to measure, and refer to them as measures, whereas the non-financial sort of elements of the framework, the things that we've identified, we sort of look at them as indicators or potential triggers. So we're not, because they're a little bit, like Steve said, they're more subjective and not as easy to measure and not as black and white. It's probably one of those things that the framework document itself includes many examples. So what we're trying to do with the frequently asked questions is just let the sector know what are the key areas that we'll be looking at initially when we are looking at what are those qualitative stuff that support the financial measures of the framework. So that's how the department's thinking of them. And as we've said, this is our first go at doing it. So I think the first one is council management meetings, and everyone on this call knows, or on this webinar knows, that that's a very important element for councils, and it's where the decisions are made, and there needs to be some good governance and proper process around that. If that's not happening for a council, that might help us inform that something may need a bit further investigation, and then we flow into our levers, and one of those could be actually going and talking with council, or actually running through how these meetings should be run, or whatever the problem may be. So that's how I'd like to think of it. It's not the intention of the department to rate them, but it helps inform the rest of those. So
I think that's the reality, isn't it? That the elements aren't mutually exclusive, and if you don't have an effective risk management framework in place, you're not recognising your strategic and operational financial risks. You're not managing those. That will play out potentially in the numbers.
Yes.
Similarly with things like your monthly reporting to council on your financials, is that the information in there to help councillors and the executive to manage their budgets and understand risks. So they're not mutually exclusive, and it's because ultimately the financial and asset ratios are it's that financial infrastructure capital that councils want to maintain over that longer period, isn't it? So, but the other elements all contribute to ultimately the financial performance of a council, and that's that's also ultimately the important component that you can measure, I suppose, in terms of the ratios.
I'll just add to that, Michael, too. Like, I suppose the numbers, you can be really good on your numbers, and maybe there's something awry in your governance. So usually, if your numbers are probably highlighting they're not near the targets, you might pop up a bit quicker, and there's probably a good chance there might be some governance problems there. But if it flips around the other way, we want to try and be able to just be a bit more proactive as well. So the department taking more of a proactive approach to help councils in certain areas.
And I suppose just quickly, just to wrap up the discussion and the timeframes that you put up earlier, Stephen. The financial management guideline is reflected in will be finalised once the legislative changes go through in the regs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Michael. We're going through a process to make that happen at the moment. I think probably apart from the couple of things I mentioned on the earlier slides that are changing, and I guess I would say that I think they're all changing in council's favour, in that it's responding directly to feedback we had from councils. The guideline that's published at the moment is the guideline, and we'll have an approved guideline that is reflected in the regulation correctly in place before 1 July. We'd hope to have that in place 2 or 3 weeks at the release before 1 July. But again, have confidence that the documentation you're looking at the moment is very much the direction that lands in.
Excellent. Great. And just finally, just one last question before we wrap up. Just the Advancing Asset Management Program. Any intel you can share there regarding timing of that program and what our listeners can expect to see what comes out of that, or terms of engagement? So.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do, Michael, is if I can just commit to getting a couple of key points out to you for sharing with the group when the presentation's made available. That one is managed out of another team here in the division, and without sounding like we don't talk to each other, because we do, I'd hate to give bad advice this morning without having checked on exactly the status of that, which is obviously important to relay. So we'll get a couple of key dots to you for the group in the next day or two.
Awesome, thank you, Steve. All right, and look, on that note, thank you, Steve and Deanne. Appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. It's always great to get information sharing with our members and through our industry. So again, look forward to working with yourselves and with our members in terms of rolling out the framework, getting better outcomes for councils, and which is what we all want, isn't it? So. But,
it absolutely is. Thank you to you, Michael, and the LGFP, and everyone who's been available today to attend. We always appreciate getting involved in these sessions, and that's very much the case today.
Thank you, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. And look, on that note, just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we finish, everyone. The LGFP is running its normal finance professionals forums in July, Friday the 14th in Brisbane, Thursday the 20th in Cairns. They're face-to-face forums, our usual annual forums, free for current LGFP members. So we'll be releasing the registration shortly for that. If you're not a member, you can jump on our website and join. It's a fairly straightforward process. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, the 1st of June, where we will be partnering with our with Crow to talk. Who will be talking about enhancing financial reporting maturity. So look forward to that one. And just finally, in terms of our annual conference, we're busy planning the annual conference. It's Tuesday to Friday, 21st to 24th November at the Royal Pines on the Gold Coast. So again, we'll be providing further information as we get closer, including opening the registration process for that. So, but look, that's enough for today, everyone. I appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you. Bye.